Hi everyone, welcome to the WinUI community call recorded version. So for this call, since the whole Redmond team is actually working at home due to the coronavirus situation, we had to run everything from our own machines and trying out a bunch of new tech. So for that reason, we had a bunch of technical difficulties this time. So I'm coming to you with a newly recorded version just for this video upload. If you notice things during the recording that seem a little bit off, it's just because we had to re-record some things just to make sure that everything is in here. As I said, just a few technical hiccups sort of held us up here, but all the content should be here for you guys, and I'm just going to get started. So once again, welcome to our monthly community call. We do these on the third Wednesday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And the next call is going to be on Wednesday, April 15th, and hopefully all of our technical issues will be solved by then. You guys can always find us on GitHub and Twitter. We love talking with you on Twitter and looking at your feature requests and bugs, fixes, and everything like that on GitHub. So as for today's call, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a recap and just an intro to WinUI. We are going to hear about some updates to TabView and a demo of those updates with a special guest who is actually a community member. I'm going to give an update on the team's progress this past month. Ryan is going to give a talk on demystifying WinUI in the Windows app development space. And then we are going to go into our Q&A where we answer your questions that are posted on GitHub, as well as your questions that you're sending in live in the chat. So what is WinUI? If you're not familiar, if you're new to the call, I'm just going to go over this quickly, and then Ryan will cover this in much more detail in his section later on. So WinUI is the native UI platform for Windows 10. You can use it to build rich .NET and C++ apps for Windows 10 devices. It powers Windows and Xbox Shell, and it also powers many Microsoft first-party apps as well as third-party apps. So for our timeline and for WinUI 3, here's our current target schedule. As it says, subject to change, of course. But last November, we released WinUI 3 Alpha, and last month, we released WinUI 3 Alpha Preview, which has WebView 2 in it, which is the Chromium-based WebView. And our next release will be around build in May, and we are then hoping to release our WinUI 3 Preview 1. So this is going to be the first version that's going to work in desktop or Win32 apps. So that's going to be really exciting for a lot of you folks who work with Win32, and you're finally going to be able to get your hands on some bits to play with. And as for our full release to market, that's still scheduled for around late 2020. So as for our roadmap, you can go to this link and check it out. Basically, it just lays out what we're planning to do until release to market. But just to give you a rundown on what WinUI 3 is specifically, so the version of the platform that we're working on right now, it removes the barriers between UWP and Win32. Your app container, it can be sandboxed or not. It's all about choice and flexibility. It can target .NET 5 and or C++. You can choose to package with MSIX or not. And you can take advantage of XAML islands for WPF, WinForms, MFC if you want to only modernize certain parts of your user interface. There's down-level support Windows 10 right now for new features. And we have our alpha available now, as I mentioned. And as I also mentioned, we just released our preview with WebView. And we will be open source at our release to market later this year. And so now I'm going to pass it off to Steven, who has recorded his session on TabView.
Awesome. Well, hello everyone. I'm Steven. I'm a program manager on the WinUI team, and I own TabView. I just wanted to give us a recap of where we were and where we're going with TabView. So, in WinUI 2.2 a few months ago, we released the first version of TabView, and it was really focused on terminal scenarios. So the Windows terminal is an application that is really awesome because it's like a modern command line, and they wanted to support multiple tabs, multiple consoles open at once. And so we built WinUI, the WinUI TabView to cover those scenarios. So specifically, you can add a new tab, you can close a tab, you can rearrange your tabs, you can keyboard between your tabs. There's some customization options. We want to make sure that we support the high level of customization that XAML as a whole supports. But in terms of the default visualization, our default tab view was more aligned with forward-facing investments that Microsoft is making. So that means having rounded corners instead of square corners, having drop shadows, because that's the latest Fluent guidance, and we wanted to ensure that the WinUI tab view was really built to support those forward-thinking investments. But around this time, there was also a Windows Community Toolkit version of the tab view. So the Windows Community Toolkit tab view actually came first a little bit. It was built a little bit earlier than the WinUI one, and it actually had a few more features than the WinUI one did when we first released it. Specifically, the Windows Community Toolkit had features around having compact tabs, so you could just show the icon, and also an extra close button hover mode that only shows the close button when you're hovering over the unselected tab. So the Windows Community Toolkit version had these features that the WinUI version didn't have, and it was confusing because we had two versions of TabView. We had one in WinUI and we had one in the Toolkit, but they had different features and it wasn't clear which one you should use. And so I filed an issue. I filed issue number 2007 to track this discrepancy, and fortunately Marcel took it upon himself to help solve this problem by adding these features to the WinUI tab view. And so I wanted to introduce Marcel and give him a little bit of fanfare because he's been really great to work with. He's been a very active contributor in the XAML controls gallery and the WinUI repo. Actually, the first place that I saw Marcel was in the XAML controls gallery, where it seems like overnight he produced it was like 34 PRs in the span of 2 weeks or something silly. So it was a high quantity of PRs, but not just that, they've been very high quality. And so I wanted to highlight in the XAML controls gallery specifically some of the changes that Marcel has made. For example, he added a page to the XAML controls gallery about accessibility, and we didn't have a sample for accessibility in the XAML controls gallery, and people were confused because making accessible pages is actually it's not evident, it's not necessarily easy to do. So Marcel built a page that shows how to make a more accessible app. And since contributing to the XAML controls gallery, he's also expanded to also contribute to WinUI. So he's building features, he's helping close bugs, he's been very active there as well. And so without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Marcel to show the features that he's added to the TabView control to help bring it up to parity with the Windows Community Toolkit. So then I'll click.
Thank you, Stephen. So yeah, my name is Marcel. I've contributed to the XAML controls gallery repo and the WinUI repo, and I will be talking about the new features of the TabView that we recently have added. So this is the XAML controls gallery. This is a TabView page, and here we have two new samples showing the new features we have added. First of all, we have the tab with behavior sample, where I will gonna show the new compact mode, and below that we have the close button behavior sample, which is a complete new API that I will gonna talk about later. So with version 1 of the TabView, we added the size to content and the equal tab with behavior. In size to content mode, the tab view items render in their natural width, that is the space they take up to render the icon and their text. With equal sizing mode, every tab takes up the same space, as you can see right now. So every tab now takes 1/3 of the space up, so it's equally spaced. One thing that was missing, as Stephen mentioned earlier, was the compact mode, which we now have added. And in compact mode, every TabView item only shows the icon, except when they are selected. So if we select this tab, now it will show its text and its icon, and the other tabs will only show the icon. Compact sizing is pretty useful in scenarios where there is not a lot of space for the tab view, and especially in scenarios where the tabs are usually recognizable by the icon. For example, in a web browser where we have the icon of the web page and the name of them, usually people will recognize a website by the icon. So that is a pretty useful use case for this compact mode. Next, we will look at the close button overlay mode API. This new API introduces 3 values, them being auto, on hover, and always. The always behavior is that we will show the close button at all times, regardless if they are selected or not. The close button mode auto is designed to be the framework default mode, which maps to one of the other modes, and will allow developers to always use the default mode of the framework to be consistent with other framework apps, and always don't have to bother with updating the code because, oh no, this app now uses that and we want to be consistent with other people. So this is designed to stay always consistent with the default behavior. And the last behavior we have added is the on hover mode, which hides the close button for every tab except when it's selected or if we hover over a tab. So if I click on this one, here the close button disappears, and if I hover over it, you can see that this is that you can see the close button here. And if we switch back, now these 2 tabs don't have the close button anymore. An important thing to note is that if you are familiar with the Windows Community Toolkit, you might know that they use the bool for this, and we switched to an enum here to allow multiple values, first of all, and to also be able to add new features to the API later without introducing any breaking changes. So that makes it easier for us to keep this up to date and introduce new behaviors that might be useful in some scenarios. One other thing we want to show you is a small proof of concept. As Stephen mentioned earlier, the TabView was primarily designed in the use case of the terminal app, which really needed such a control. And we have made a proof of concept using those 2 new features. So as you can see, those tabs only show their close button when we hover over them, which is pretty useful because the UI doesn't look that cluttered anymore. And one thing we have added in this proof of concept is this magical button, which will allow us to switch to compact and equal sizing. So if you use multiple shells and have a lot of tabs open in your terminal, this is pretty good to have, because you really don't need the name, because usually you know, oh, this is a Linux shell, yes, I need that right now. And by switching to only show the icon and staying in compact mode, we save a lot of space and have a much cleaner UI and a much better interface to use. And so, yes. So to recap, the new TabView features we have added are the new compact mode, which only shows the icon of the TabView items, and the complete new close button overlay mode API, which allows to specify the behavior of the close button and when to show it. And that's all there is to say, I think. All I have to share with you right now.
So that's super cool. Like, sitting in my seat, as the program manager that is helping to drive TabView, it was awesome to see not just that we've built a TabView control that works for terminal, but that actually can introduce new features into terminal. Like we have the opportunity here to make our apps even better, and it's really thanks to Marcel. So I do want to celebrate and thank him again. Thank you, Marcel, for doing this. And anybody, part of the dream of WinUI is that contributors like Marcel can contribute to our code and to our repo. And so if you're interested in getting started, we actually just released a new website at aka.ms/WinUI. And if you're interested, if this has excited you as much as it's excited me, you can definitely go check out that website to get started yourself. So thank you very much. Hand it back to Anna.
All right, thanks so much. That was such an exciting demo. So always good to see our community contributions really paying off in the platform. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint here. Oops. And so I'm just going to go over, let me minimize this. I'm just going to go over some progress updates. So as for WinUI 2, we have exciting updates rolling out on Progress Ring. Navigation View is now built on items repeater, and Navigation View will have support for hierarchy. So you can find all of this in the upcoming pre-release package that I believe is coming out later this week. And as for WinUI 3, I think many of you have already seen it and are already discussing it, but if you didn't know, the Window and Application API spec, written by our very own Miguel, who is on the call right now, is up on GitHub, so you all can take a look at that spec. That has some really exciting information for WinUI 3. And just to highlight a cool community contribution that we've had since the past community call, there was a contribution for the TabView, the close button tooltip, to change it so that it was aligned stylistically and content-wise with Edge, and I believe this was submitted by Felix Dev, who I'm not sure if you're on the call, but if you are, thank you for that. Definitely a cool improvement to see. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Ryan, who I think is going to take control over the slides here.
I am going to try and do that.
Okay.
Awesome. It looks like I have control, and you can see a very handsome Ryan Demopoulos with a little arrow floating around. So, I wanted to take a few minutes and chat with you guys about demystifying sort of what WinUI is and how it relates to other texts and terms. There's probably some other technologies and terms that maybe I won't cover in this section, so we can maybe handle some of that in the Q&A. The other thing I want to mention is I know that there's a number of MVPs, Microsoft MVPs, that are tuned into this call right now. This is going to be a little bit of a repeat of some of the presentation that I gave at the MVP Summit. So just a forewarning, I hope you don't yawn too hard on some of the stuff if you've already seen it. I am going to go into maybe a little bit more detail because I know that there's a lot of people on the call that aren't super familiar with these technologies. They might be students, they might be people who've never written an Windows app before in their lives. And so I'm going to try and give a pretty basic overview of this stuff. So with that said, okay, Win32, desktop apps, UWP, XAML, WinUI 2 and 3. What does all this stuff mean? There's a lot of terms there, a lot of things to go and define. I think the easiest place to start here is to try and let people know that really in Windows there's basically, this seems like an oversimplification, but there's basically two types of applications you can make in Windows. There are desktop or Win32 apps, and there are universal Windows platform apps. There's a bunch of differences between these apps, and there's no one single sentence that's easy to say what the difference is. Some people say the universal apps are the store apps. Okay, yeah, that's at least was true at one point. It was only UWP apps that could be in the store, and then we've since expanded the store, and now you can have Win32 style apps in there as well. Desktop apps are usually HWin based. That's the core sort of fundamental windowing construct, and that governs how Input and Output Works and Universal Windows Platform apps. They use Core Window, and they have a very different sort of very fundamental windowing concept, and how they handle input is different. You'll often hear people say the big difference between these two types of apps is the security container or the app container, and that actually might be the best definition out of all the definitions, because that security or app container is really the reason that we the underlying reason why we created a whole different set of technologies like the new Core Window and all of the different sort of other pieces of the UWP landscape. But fundamentally, just to impress upon you, there's really two types of apps. And on the Win32 or desktop app side, there are a number of established UI frameworks that have been created literally over decades. I don't know how old Common Controls is. I maybe should have looked that up. Probably 20 years old, maybe. So there's a sort of a UX platform and a set of controls that's been baked into Windows that is actually, if you take a look at the picture on the screen there, most of those will be Common Controls. And that comes in a DLL called ComCuttle32, and there's these technologies, ComCuttle32 and User32, have been around in the Windows operating system for a very long time. They're very stable. They're sort of older looking controls, you might say, but they work really great. Lots of apps use them. And then over time, we have added a bunch of other frameworks, and some of them are layer over the common controls, like what MFC does. So Microsoft Foundation Classes was a C++ layering over top of the common controls. .NET came along and brought a number of other UX technologies like WinForms and WPF. And this isn't a holistic list. Microsoft has created a bunch of other UI frameworks that allow you to do Windows apps in some way. You might even think of web technologies as allowing you to do apps that run on Windows, since you run a browser on a Windows machine. So there's tons and tons of ways to go and do apps. But in the desktop space, the frameworks that we think about a lot when we talk about WinUI are the ones that are sort of on the screen. And then in the universal apps side, we have what I'm just going to call WinUI 2. Now, people who know what WinUI is will know that technically, right now in market, WinUI 2 is a library of controls that sits on top of UWP XAML. So UWP XAML is baked into the OS XAML-based framework. XAML is a language, and it's an XML-based syntax and language for describing UI. And we have a framework built into the operating system, and we've been working on it for quite a few years, a little bit under a decade. And that framework provides modern controls. I would say the most modern controls, the most fluent controls that we offer in the Windows operating system. And then WinUI 2's library that you can that you see in our repo, if you go there and you see the source code for it, it is a library of controls and styles that sits on top of UWP XAML. It might inject more confusion than it helps, but I've been referring to this lately as just all of that whole pile of goo, as WinUI 2. And the reason I refer to that is because this is technology soup, where you're trying to say, oh, well, actually, technically, that thing is in UWP XAML, not in the WinUI library. Just erase your brain for a minute. Just call all the stuff that's pre-WinUI 3 WinUI 2. That's the way that I at least think about it in my mind. It might not be super accurate, but it is an easy way to talk about the difference between WinUI 2 and WinUI 3. So this is kind of the state of the world today before WinUI 3. We've got these Win32 style apps. There's a whole bunch of UI frameworks. There's Universal Windows Platform or UWP apps is what they're often referred to. And when you're making UI for that, most people are using, if you're targeting that specifically, you're using the WinUI 2 stack. Think of it that way. And okay, well, where does WinUI 3 fit in? Why are we working on WinUI 3? What are we doing with it? The thing to realize is that both sides of this equation have problems. The problem on the left, as I mentioned, is these frameworks are aging. They're very stable, and they actually work great for some people, and some people should make even new apps in those frameworks. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But for people who want to sort of be a little bit more modern in their user interface, they want to support modern devices, maybe like some of the dual screen devices we've talked about. They want to support touch. They want to have a more fluent look. These frameworks can't do that. They weren't really. They were designed kind of at a time before all of that sort of the tech industry moved in that direction, and so relatedly, these frameworks you can't really easily use or mix and match WinUI. You can use something called XAML Islands, which is a technology that we released that allows you to sort of mix and match the WinUI 2 stuff with these frameworks on the left on your screen. But XAML Islands only works down to Windows 10 19H1, which would be 1903, and so it's not really fully accessible because a lot of users aren't running that version. On the right side, there are actually some issues that we also have with the WinUI 2 solution. One of them is in-market deliverability. Because the UWP XAML framework underneath is baked into the OS, every time we want to go and change something, if we want to change how button works or a text box control works, that change will be released with a Windows 10 update, and that Windows 10 update is only running on anyone who's taken that update. But we know that the world doesn't all take the same, isn't always on the same version of Windows 10 at once, and so we can't get those improvements to you in market. The other problem that we run into on the right side here is a sort of forced update model. So if you write an app for the WinUI 2 stack of technologies, and then we make a change, say, to how buttons work or how text boxes work, that change will come down and sort of like shift underneath your application because you're using the built-in version into the OS, and that version of UWP XAML just updated on you underneath you. And so as a result, you get upgraded without even knowing it or doing anything. And it is possible for you to be broken when that update happens. We try very, very hard not to make any breaking changes at all when we do updates, but it is software, and it's sometimes very difficult to ensure that we have no breaking changes. And so as a result, you are essentially forced to always be running on the version that you're ultimately, I guess, your user decides when they upgrade their Windows machine. So WinUI 3 comes in to help try and solve these problems. And specifically, WinUI 3 will work on 1803 plus and above. Every feature in WinUI 3 is intended to work on an older version of Win 10, and we believe that that's going to give us roughly, when WinUI 3 comes out, probably somewhere in the area of 90% of market share for all Windows 10 devices, and there are 1 billion of them because we just announced that this week. So that is a lot of machines, a lot of sockets. And it allows us to have a situation where when we make a new feature, it just works in market on day one. And then the other thing that WinUI 3 does is it uses something called side-by-side versioning. So rather than in-place updating the framework like I had mentioned, now you choose when you want to move to whatever version of WinUI 3 you want. If you're happy with 3.0, your app is stable, you don't need anything new, then stay on 3.0. You can stay on it forever. But if you want to go and move to 3.1, because maybe there's a new widget in there, maybe there's some new capability that you want, maybe there's some improvement, then you can choose to move to 3.1, and you're really in control rather than being at sort of the mercy of the machine that your app is running on. WinUI 3 is also, though, going to try and solve the problems on the left side, too. So specifically, it is going to provide a pathway for these desktop or Win32 style apps to go and use the latest technology that we have been investing in actually for several years now. So for the first time, these style of apps, these Win32 apps, HWin-based apps, are going to be able to, on 1803 plus and above, they'll be able to use WinUI 3, have that fluent look, have that fluent feel. And we get a lot of excitement from you as the community. If you're sort of in that camp where you weren't able to go to UWP for some reason, you were still writing a Win32 app, and now there will very soon be this sort of bridge forward for you that can work in a very real way in market. And the other thing I'll mention here is that can also be done in a Win32 app either with or without islands. So islands is something that, as I'd mentioned earlier, it's a technology that sort of basically allows you to sort of punch a hole in your Win32 app, and you can go and put modern UWP XAML content in. That's what Island does today. But in WinUI 3, Islands is going to ship inside WinUI 3. It's like another control almost, and it's basically control specifically meant for Win32 apps. And you can have your existing MFC or WinForms or WPF content and then just like have a little region in your screen where you've got that modern WinUI stuff so you can gradually migrate your UI. Or you can just say, no, I don't want any islands at all. I'm going to keep all of my business logic, but I'm just going to nuke the UI. I'm going to go right to WinUI 3 exclusive. I'm going to keep all of that investment that I've made in Win32, but I'm going to just rewrite it in WinUI 3. So I apologize if that's an unneeded recap for some folks on the call, but I just wanted to sort of level set with folks and just sort of show like this is why we're doing WinUI 3. We're really trying to solve problems on both sides of the spectrum here and provide a path forward for any type of app, whether it's an existing one or a new one. So that's kind of the exciting thing about it. And the last thing I'll just say here, because I know we're actually at time, so I'll shoot through this really quick. We often say that WinUI is the native UX platform for Windows 10 and 10X. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is actually every OS has like a native, or sometimes some OSs have multiple native UX platforms. And what we're trying to do is have WinUI 3 and WinUI in general be sort of like the most Windowsy UX framework that we make for Microsoft. And it is the one that runs natively. It's built in C++. It's very highly performant. It really embodies Fluent. And if you want to go and write to that directly because you want to make a Windows app for 10 or 10X, great. You can go and write to WinUI. WinUI 3 is a fantastic path for that once it will ship. But the other thing to realize is that there are a lot of middleware and cross-platform frameworks out there that also sort of layer over the native stacks of all the different OSs. So Xamarin Forms, React Native, when they run those apps on Android, they're using the native controls for Android, or when they're running on a Mac, they use the native controls there. And so WinUI 3 will be the native sort of fork for Windows, and Xamarin Forms and React Native today already use WinUI 2, and actually with React Native, for example, you're running a UWP app effectively that's using that WinUI 2 stack when you're using React Native for Windows. And so WinUI 3 will also be something that's used in those types of apps as well, and that's because it's the native framework for Windows. So it'll be a framework that is both used directly by people, but some people will be using WinUI 3 and they won't even know it. So I hope that helps explain some of it. There's a lot of other technologies I could have went into. I saw MSIX, for example, on the call earlier. It's not really a UI tech. But with that, I think I'll turn things back over. That's all the content that we had. It's 10 o'clock. I want to be pretty respectful of people's times. Maybe we could take a couple questions. And I know that some folks might have to drop off the call. Anna?
Hey, Ryan. I crowdsourced it over in the chat, and people have asked us to proceed with the questions for as long as we have time for. They seem all in for it. So if your calendar allows...
yeah, I'm free. I'm free and happy to answer questions.
You're free?
Yeah.
All right.
And if I could just chime in here, just so everybody knows, there were a few issues with recording the beginning of the call, but the Q&A session should be fully recorded, so if you do have to jump off or go to an MVP Summit talk or anything like that, you should be able to find a video of at least the Q&A section later, so you won't be missing out. But thanks to everybody who's been joining in so far.
That's perfect. All right, Anna, should we throw it over to the Teams call so that people can see who's answering?
Yep. Sounds good.
All right, I suppose I should turn my camera on too.
Sorry, Savoy, you're going to serve up these questions? And
yes, I'll be on board with that. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our home studios. Looks like we'll be proceeding as planned with the Q&A. I wanted to thank Austin and Ranjesh, who've been working hard with me this time to grab your questions from behind the scenes and list them out here for us. And let me give a quick introduction to Ranjesh. I know a lot of people have been asking where Jevin went. Jevin is on hiatus from the controls team. He's pursuing really big work for our team. Don't worry, he's still a part of it. And in the meantime, Ranjesh has stepped up to assume the lead role for the controls team, and he's joining us here on the call today to take questions alongside Ryan. And we also have Miguel, who we know has been super popular with his windowing spec for XAML Islands recently. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Due to how this all went down this time, I'll just kind of be picking questions shotgun style. So let's take a look at this one first. I'm just going to randomly pick them and hope they work out. So this one's directed towards Ryan. Quarley asks, is there a time frame for when features like the XAML ribbon are due to be implemented for feature parity with other frameworks?
I don't have a precise time. Like, I'll just talk about ribbon specifically, which is also near and dear to my heart because I worked in the Windows ribbon framework. It was one of the first things that I ever did when I came to the company. So making a ribbon is something I would love to do. I would say the best time frame I can give is sometime probably in 2021, as in it won't be this year. The team is really heads down trying to get WinUI 3 out the door. We're making new controls, and there will be new controls even in WinUI 3. As you guys might already be aware, WinUI 2 continues to march on. We release every 4 months, and we're constantly adding new things like the TabView that you saw, like number box, like teaching tip, like improvements to progress ring, and all the other stuff that we've discussed. A ribbon is a big, complex control. It is like, on like a 1 to 10 of like the control scale, it's like almost a 10. So it's a thing that's going to require multiple devs, a lot of specking, a lot of getting it right, and I would imagine that that's something that we would have to address in like a 3.1 or 2 or something next year. That's probably what we're looking at.
Perfect. And Ryan, while we have you here, there's another question from Saint4Eva who asks, if we could please shade some more light on the UWP, WinUI, and .NET 5 story.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the chat. WinUI 3 and .NET 5. Yeah, basically at build, preview 1, we anticipate having .NET 5 support for those Win32 or desktop style apps. UWP will continue to be .NET native at that time. Toward the end of the year, when we ship, we expect to have full .NET 5 support for both sides of that equation. That is the Win32 and also the UWP side. The thing that often gets confused here, by the way, is a couple times we've said we're not going to have .NET Core support, and that sometimes totally throws people for a loop because they hear, oh, we're going to have .NET 5 support, but we're not going to have .NET Core support, and those are kind of the same technology, and the reality is they are. Basically, .NET 5 is like the continuation of .NET Core. So if we say we're not going to have .NET Core support, all that really means is we're not going to be supporting .NET Core in the time frame where we still call it .NET Core. Like we're effectively transitioning to the new name .NET 5, and that's the thing that we're targeting. It is technically kind of .NET Core, but by the time we ship, we're just going to be referring to everything, all that stuff is .NET 5.
Cool. And Miguel, I see you on the call. Thanks for making time to join us. Since we have you here, I'll throw some Windows spec questions your way.
Okay.
Andrew Boyasharin on GitHub asks a few questions. I'll try and group them together in a succinct question here so that you can answer it easily. He wants to know, will the mux.window have a cool modern UWP look by default even on Win32? And he's interested in knowing a little bit more about styling. Can it glow like VS, have shadows and themes? And would it be possible to specify custom draggable areas and extended views into title bar?
That's a very good question. So we split the work of window into several phases. The first phase is the most fundamental APIs, just to make it work, just to put the content of the SAML inside of the H-wing and do some 80% of the cases of the window. So just to answer the question, not for the phase 1. For the phase 1, but we are working on. We have a huge backlog where we are going to deal with all these kind of things, but we don't know yet when we are going to land on all these future requests. For example, asking about the top level window. So something that we are doing actively is just giving to you the H-wing of the H-wing of the window that hosts the SAML content. With the H-wing of the window, are you going to be able to grab the H-wing and apply any kind of Win32 API that you really want? So it means that you want to set up the topmost window, getting the H-wing of this window are going to enable just to put the window in the topmost. So this is something that we are going to add as a first phase of these windowing APIs. Basically that.
Cool. And so Josephus Pay also asks, would it be possible to make the window frameless with no border or title bar, or transparent?
Well, so for the phase 1, no, is not part of this first set of API. For the it's in the backlog for sure, and also we are actively working on making in evaluating this scenario, but it's not going to be part of the phase 1. However, again, you are going to be able to do that because we are going to give you the HWin. So with the HWin, you can apply the Win32 API and try just to remove the border or this stuff. About transparency is a little more complicated because XAML is over. XAML XAML is using something called desktop Windows XAML source. This desktop Windows XAML source has a solid background color just for security reasons. We are not going to remove this solid color in the phase in the first phase of the window API. It's something that we are evaluating for later. So it's going to be a little more tricky to achieve several scenarios. But it's in the backlog. We are working actively on all these things. The thing is, we don't know yet when we are going to land in these APIs.
Sweet. Okay, so Ryan, another question for you. Masa J asks, will WinUI 3 backwards compatibility be the same as WinUI 2? Will WinUI 2 keep its current backwards compatibility or follow where WinUI 3's alpha compatibility goes?
WinUI, you've caught me a little bit here. I can't remember how far back we go in WinUI 2 now because we changed it not a couple releases ago.
So Masi J actually included that. They said it's
great.
15063. Which I think is like the very specific version number.
Yeah, I always think in the RS versions. I think is that RS3? Rajesh, do you remember?
He says RS2.
RS2? Yeah. So the answer to will WinUI 3 go back to RS2, the answer to that is no. I think we're currently targeting now RS4, which is 1803. And will WinUI 2 continue to go back to RS2? I would say, in general, our overall sort of philosophy around how far back we go, or how down level we go, the term we use, is we try and cover about 90% of the market. So at some point, it would not surprise me if we dropped RS2 support with WinUI 2 and went to RS4. I would say we wouldn't do that arbitrarily. Like if everything was working on RS2 and we felt it wasn't a substantially increased testing burden, then we might just keep that the same. I think you do. There's another thing that I think is a worthy thing to bring up here, which is there will be a period of time where WinUI 2 and WinUI 3 simultaneously ship. So it's not like WinUI 2 is just suddenly going to disappear. And when WinUI 3 comes out, we'll be encouraging people move to WinUI 3. That's really the new train. That's like the new series. But people can't, just shift their entire lives in like one day. There's going to be some period of time where WinUI 2, it'll take a while for people to sort of move off that UWP XAML to WinUI 3 stack. So that's I know that's sort of tangential to your question, but it kind of gave me a chance to explain that as well. So.
Ryan, Morton Nielsen asks, are you sure you don't want to make it run on 14.393 so that it can run on our Windows phones?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. I loved Windows Phone. I felt like I was one of the last holdouts, but there are people who still use Windows Phone, so I'm clearly not the last.
Okay. So I should grab this since it was one of the first questions asked. Alvin Ashcraft asks, are there issues with observable collection expected to be resolved when the preview ships? Could the team talk about progress with known issues? Is this a question for Rajesh?
Probably better for Rajesh than me.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Rajesh. You might have seen me do a few posts in GitHub. Finally showing my face in public. So the observable collection issue is an issue with the projection, the way we project, and internally we ended up kind of automatically using the Windows UI namespace types in there. which caused us to a whole lot of trouble for the alpha release. And we're trying to fix that, and I think we're likely going to fix it for WinUI desktop. And there's some work that we're doing, so I want to be careful about what I commit here. It's something that we're working on, definitely.
Excellent. Thanks, Ranjesh. So let's see what else we haven't grabbed yet. So Ryan, one of the biggest discussions in the last month that's occurred around WinUI has been cross-platform support, which has been proposed by Jose, SuperJMN. Is there anything we'd like to contribute to that discussion at this time? The team's been pretty radio silent on it and just letting the community talk so far.
Yeah, sure, I'll answer that. And maybe even before I do that, the one thing I do want to say about cross-platform is we know that everyone is very interested in what we want to do there. The thing I want to set sort of like the time scale of when things could realistically happen here, just so that it's not like every month or every call it's like, oh, what's the latest crossplot? What's the latest crossplot? Let me try and just quickly level set here. WinUI 3 is really about making Windows apps. It's us lifting out of the OS. It's going to be our main focus point for the next, I don't know, rest of the year, basically, or almost the rest of the year. When we're executing on WinUI 3, which is primarily what I'm trying to go and drive the team to do, we also begin planning, okay, well, what do we do, in like a post-WinUI 3 world? And that planning itself takes a couple forks. One of them is, what do we do in WinUI 3.1, or what do we do in 3.2? And then the other fork is like, what's the longer-term sort of big stuff? And cross-platform would probably be one of those longer-term or big stuff type of areas. And it's not the only other big stuff type of area either. Like, we're looking at Visual Studio Code support, maybe different programming models, like an MVU style programming model that we could go layer on top of the framework. There's a lot of ideas that we have. They're not plans, they're ideas. But cross-platform is one of the ones that I think people really, really want to hear about and really want to see WinUI do. I think most of the leadership on our side feels that we would probably want to go in that direction post WinUI 3. And then, of course, there's like a lot of details that have to get worked out if we want to go and do that. There's a lot of conversation about how does that relate to React Native? How does that relate to Xamarin Forms? That's probably the most interesting one. And what, because that's an important technology that serves a very important customer base, and so we don't want to have confusion between those technologies. So that's something that also has to be worked out and planned. So I just want to level set that, like, it's going to be a while before we have like a cross-platform plan. I think the thing, if you want to know how you can help out now, or how anyone in the community can help out now, I think the biggest thing is help us gather information about maybe a couple things. One, what does cross-plat mean for you? Because cross-plat means mobile for a lot of people. For some people it means, I really need Linux support. For a lot of people it means I need Mac support. And also help us to understand too, what you expect the experience to be if we go cross-platform. So, if we brought WinUI 3 is like not just the XAML layer, it's the visual layer too. And so if we just brought that whole chunk of change everywhere, you would get fluent-looking apps running on, an iPhone, say, or something like that. Is that what you want? Do you want the app to look like a Fluent app on the iPhone, or would you rather it look like something that was built natively for the iPhone? We've discussed with developers sort of that question, and we get mixed answers. So I think more data on what platforms could we hit and what is the experience you want when we go cross-platform. What we can do with that information from you is we can then start working that into our long-term planning, which will take a while to unfold. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Ryan. Important question here. Dwellic asks, how likely is it that WinUI 3 will be ready to launch when the first Windows 10X devices launch? They say they're interested in jumping into the Windows dev world, and they're trying to decide what approach makes the most sense at this point.
WinUI 3 will come out. I need to refresh myself on the release, on what has been communicated around the new sort of like dual screen devices. So, because I don't have that fresh in my mind, and I'm also not 100% sure on what's public and not, because I tend to get both types of information about what I can share and not. One thing I will say is WinUI 3 will come out very close to the end of the year. That is the date that we're aiming for. And, when that comes out, sort of, the WinUI community can react to that in two different ways, or you can prepare for that in two different ways. One is you can start using a preview prior to 3.0 shipping and start integrating that, playing with it, seeing if it meets your needs. Or the other thing you do is you can wait for 3.0 RTM and then start using it. If you wait for 3.0 RTM and you're not using the previews and you're not already playing with it, you're going to be then you're going to be I wouldn't say flat-footed, but you're going to be sort of starting at the end of the year to just begin looking at that thing. So if you want to start evaluating ahead of time, I think the previews are the way that you can start to do that. But realistically, the most stable way to hit dual screen devices sort of in the UWP space is going to be WinUI 2. And that's going to be true for a while, just because of the instability that WinUI 3 is going to have all the way through until the end of the year.
Perfect. And so Anthony Winstead asks, is WinUI suitable for old school VB and VBA people like me?
I just got this question. I got a VB6 question on a podcast that just did. I kind of flubbed that answer, so you give me a mulligan with this one.
Good news.
I think the best answer I can say here is, as I said earlier in the call, there's two types of apps basically. There's HWin based apps, Win32 apps, and then there's UWP ones. There's a lot of UI frameworks and a lot of technologies in that HWin sort of Win32 camp. There's nothing theoretically that I know of, maybe Miguel can chime in if I'm wrong, that would mean that you couldn't use islands in a VB6 app. I don't think that's a scenario that we're going to be actively targeting and testing. Honestly, the frameworks that we spend a lot of time on thinking about are the MFC crowd, WinForms, and WPF. Those audiences really just want a path to modernization of their apps. We hear that very loud and clear from them, especially the MFC crowd, because they really haven't had the C++, the native developer really hasn't had a lot of new UX stuff to be excited about in Windows in a very, very long time. So our testing and a lot of our focus is going to focus there. I think probably you could hack up islands in a VB6 app, probably. Now Austin and Miguel can yell at me if I'm saying too much, but it's not. That's we don't think about that very much on a day-to-day basis.
Quick question here from Morton. Morton wants to know, if we've cut WebView, can't we just rename WebView 2 to WebView?
Sorry, who's that for?
That could be for you or Rajesh, not sure who controls that decision.
I know Adam Barlow's on the call. I won't ask him to necessarily chime in. I would say that we debated a long time what to do about WebView 2 versus WebView and what we should call the thing. I actually wasn't completely in on all those conversations. I just know that very, very smart, capable people finally concluded it was best to just call it WebView 2. So I'll leave it at that. I think one of the problems with calling it WebView, one of the obvious ones to me, even though I wasn't deeply in those conversations, is you have a WebView today, and it has an API. You expect that API to work the way it does. You suddenly try and move from something like WinUI 2 to WinUI 3, and then that thing doesn't work the way you thought it did anymore because it's a totally new WebView, Chromium-based. Maybe its APIs are different. So, I think probably that's the reason why we didn't. You could call it anything. You could call it Super Duper WebView or something like that. But the one thing that you probably can't do is just call it WebView, because then people's code will just break and they'll be like, why the heck doesn't this WebView work anymore the way it used to?
Perfect. iHawk asks, and this question will be for Miguel, will it be possible to just use app windows in the Win32 app model? My use case is to use non-UI libraries that do not work in the UWP context. All UI-related parts can be completely UWP/WinUI.
So unfortunately, app window is not part of the WinUI 3.0 release. It is something that we postponed. So the answer is no. In this WinUI 3.0, when we release that, you can't use app window for Win32 or even for UWP.
Thanks, Miguel. Ryan, David Hitchin asks, will Preview 1 support Visual Basic project types?
I don't think so. We have no plans for that.
All right. Let's see. Now the text gets a little smaller here. Martin Anderson is asking, will WinUI 3.0 continue to power the new Xbox Series X shell and app platform? Will there be Xbox templates for controls as well as behavior code samples and app templates?
That's a great question. I would say WinUI 3.0, when it ships later this year, is not generally going to be is not going to work on and be supported for Xbox. We're looking at Xbox support to happen as soon as possible after 3.0 because we actually kind of feel that's a little painful. But it's just a thing that we're not going to be able to stand up in time due to a bunch of input work that actually happened around game controllers and stuff that just doesn't fit in the schedule. Once we get to Xbox support, I know that the Xbox team that we've been working with over the months talking about WinUI 3, they're very interested in many ways in having WinUI 3 support. They've been actually one of the great teams that really is willing to work with us and chat with us about that. So I think there will be more that we talk about, maybe at Build, maybe at Ignite, about what the roadmap, once we start to extend the roadmap out a little bit more around the Xbox thing. But I would say that Xbox support is definitely on the horizon, and it will probably be used in the Xbox experience as well as in Xbox apps, but that's not something that's going to be very deeply done this year. And that's just a point in time thing because we have to focus on 10 and 10X and a gajillion other things we're focusing on.
Sweet. Martin, we see your question about having customizable tab orientation in TabView 3. Unfortunately, Steven's not on the call, so we'll direct that to him offline and get back to you on that. Ryan, Chief Clondog asks, how difficult is it, / what is the process for extending native controls in C#? What level of control do you have? Are there things that are really only exposed on the native side?
I can take that.
Okay.
From WinUI perspective, we just build native controls and they're projected as WinMDs. And those get projected to different languages like either C++, WinRT C++, or .NET. And when you're consuming it, it's going to be natural to just the CLR will know about those types through the WinMD. And in the case of WinRT C++, we end up generating a bunch of header files, so you include the header files. So from a consumption perspective, I don't think there's going to be any difference. So you're going to see the same set of APIs. And if you're writing a managed control, you're going to have the same experience. So you're going to see those types derive from them and just do it exactly like how we would consume a managed library. So I don't think there's going to be much difference there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ranjesh. I see a question from M. Barrel and Martin Anderson that I'll actually take. They're asking about title bar customization in WinUI 3. So that's actually something that lies with Shell Team. One of our other engineering managers filed an issue on that for the Shell Team. They're all in on Windows 10X right now, but we're hoping to at least see that acknowledged and understand how they're going to handle that within the coming weeks here. I hope to be able to report back on that soon. Ryan, Martin Anderson is asking, can we have a better understanding about what will be missing in V1 of WinUI 3.0? He also wants to know what Microsoft apps are planning to be the forefront of best practice examples for WinUI desktop apps in terms of design and functionality.
Okay, remember that second question so that I can get to that one because I'll forget it. Okay. For the first one, it was what's coming. Can we get a better sense of that? I think the first question I'll ask in response is, just to make sure, is if you've seen the page that we put up on our repository. Maybe somebody could dig up a link and post it into the chat. We have a page that is sort of trying to telegraph for you what features are coming and what aren't. The second thing I'll say is the list of features that we're tracking for what will and won't be in 3.0 is hundreds of rows long. So it's hard for me to like comment on that on the call, but I'll say two high-level things. Number one, most features will be there. I would estimate probably about 90 to 95% of the capabilities of WinUI 2, meaning UWP XAML and the WinUI 2 library, will be in WinUI 3. And so, like, the good news is a lot of it will be there, and actually it will also be working down to 1803, which is really exciting because there's a number of things that we can't get down to 1803, like improvements to text boxes and things like that. So that's a high-level statement. There are some specific things that we're not on path for right now, and I would say the two most noteworthy ones are probably background acrylic, which is, we know a lot of people have a lot of pain around that. I think we have a lot of pain around that too. There are some technological reasons, really, really, really hard technological reasons as to why that is not on path for 3.0. So that's a thing that we're going to have to discuss and are discussing amongst ourselves, like how can we get that stood up as fast as possible after 3.0. And then the second one is there's a lot being figured out in the inking space. High performance inking is another challenge. Once we decouple from the OS, there's a bunch of things that are just now hard to achieve, and so that's another noteworthy feature. There will be probably some other features. Stay tuned to the list that we have on the WinUI repo. That's our place where we're going to put out that public information. That's as much as I can say.
Sweet. So we are at about the hour time here. We have only 4 questions left. Ryan, do you want to do a rapid fire round on these last 4, or should we save them for next time?
Okay, rapid fire. I promise not to talk for hours.
I think everyone listening in would love that. But let's try and keep it short here. Chief Klondong wants to know what's our plan for icon support. Will we be having a library of icons? Are we planning on opening up something like that for the community to contribute to?
Wow, that is a cool idea. We have not been planning that at all. I kind of think that's awesome. Cool. I'll put that in the cool idea bank.
Matthew wants to know, can we have WinUI 3 apps that target both UWP and Win32?
Like the same app?
I believe it's the same app targeting both app models.
I think there's probably a lot of code reuse you can do. Honestly, I think you should tweet at Miguel. Maybe we can put Miguel's handle in there. I think he might be able to help out answer about how you would do some of that code reuse. Because, fundamentally, there's 2 types of apps. It's not like you can have one app in 2 models, but maybe follow up with Miguel and we can talk about like how you could architect so that you could have both the UWP and Win32 version. I'd also love to know why you want that. That'd be cool too.
Stephen Peters is keeping me honest. We forgot part 2 of the earlier question of Golden Path app examples for WinUI desktop apps.
Say that again.
So earlier, part 2 of Martin's question was, do we have any golden examples first party for WinUI desktop apps?
Oh, got it. If we're in desktop or Win32 apps?
Correct.
We don't have any in the wild right now because because that capability doesn't exist. But I would say that we have a number of first-party teams that are looking at it. Probably PowerToys is one of the more interesting ones that are going to be trying to build a solution based off that. But we'll have more to say at Build.
Cool. And still rapid fire last 2. Is there a time frame for the new data list control?
Don't know.
So data grid.
Data grid.
Oh,
yeah,
data
I want to
grid.
make sure I got
Okay.
that right. Yeah, I don't have a time frame for that. Data grids are kind of like ribbons. They're very expensive and very complicated. I very much want a new data grid. I don't have a time frame for it right now. That's a thing that we're exploring.
Cool. And so last question from Chief Klondog. For enterprise desktop development where performance matters, what, if any, is the pressure to write your own controls natively to continue to get higher performance out of the framework? Is the expectation that all performance-critical user controls will be written that way in the future?
Yeah, we're trying to, in WinUI, we're trying to write everything natively. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. One is performance. But actually, another really important reason is that if we write things in .NET or in C#, then we require every app to spin up the CLR in order to go and use that technology. And we're really trying to make WinUI the native framework that C++, pure C++ apps can also use in addition to the .NET crowd. So that's why we strictly write in C++. We do have a data grid out there that is written in C#, and I'd really like to see that thing rewritten in C++.
Perfect. All right, so thanks everyone. I want to give a shout out to Ranjesh and Austin and a lot of the devs on their teams who were working hard to answer a lot of your questions in the chat. They helped up-level the ones that we asked live here in the call. I hope we got to everyone's question. If anything was missed, please let us know, and we'll be sure to respond to it on the GitHub issue for this call. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Anna to help us close out.
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody on our team over here at Microsoft for taking the time to answer questions, and thanks to everybody on the call and the chat just being interested and being patient with us. It means a lot, and we're really excited to just get in a lot of new stuff and for everybody to get their hands on it. So, yep, I think we're good to go then. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.